Hey there. So, like I was saying, sorry, the previous video got a little bit messed up. One of my many children ran in and I had to usher them out because they were not appropriately dressed, is what I'll say. But yeah, so go ahead and just take one of the concepts that you've learned in class and apply them to something, but actually do it. Also, if you're unsure of what a TED Talk should look like, look at the samples that we gave you. We provided you at least two of them, and you can just Google TED Talk or YouTube TED Talk, and you'll see lots of examples of how to go ahead and do that. So there's that in terms of the TED Talk. Also, do me a solid. Office hours, I'm available. BB Collaborate session, I'm there the whole time. Oftentimes, we're just kind of sitting there in silence because nobody asks questions or they'll wait till email me later. And honestly, if you email me during the week, I'm gonna wait till office hours or to BB Collaborate to answer your questions. So go ahead and show up during those sessions. It'll be a lot better for you. So just a brief overview of the gender relations and sexuality chapter. So we're squishing a whole lot into this chapter because gender in and of itself, obviously people have written whole books about gender and about sexuality. They're both really, really complex issues. But to narrow it down to sort of this chapter into our textbook, there's a couple of main points, right? The big one would be the main difference between sex and gender, right? The way I first learned about this when I started to do work on specifically on gender and crime. So people would say, okay, sex is body parts, gender is identity. Gender is a part of how you feel. And if I could find a little, I think it's called the gingerbread person tool. I will add it to our module today as well. It does a good job of explaining sex and gender. But basically, sex refers to biology. So male body parts or female body parts. So it's biology, whether you have, for the most part, a penis or vagina. That's what it falls into. Although there are people who are intersexed as well. Chapter talks a little bit about that. And gender refers to identity, how you look, how you dress, and how you feel. So you can have male parts, but you can be a woman. You can have female parts, but identify as a man. So it's a bit confusing at times, but that's basically how we think about it. Sex refers to body parts, gender refers to how you look, to identity, how you identify, and how you feel on the inside, right? So there's that. The chapter talks a little bit about Anne Oakley and her really, really important book, The Sociology of Housework. As a whole, she basically identifies the what they would call the gendered form of labor. Gendered basically meaning in this context, the labor that women do at home. So moms, grandmas, is not paid. It's really, really hard actually. If any of you have kids and if any of you have actually stayed home with the kids, have been in charge of taking care of kids and cooking and cleaning, it's way harder than going and having a 9 to 5 job. I did it briefly when my first child was born. I stayed home for about 5 or 6 months, and it's way harder to watch a kid and cook and clean and be home all the time than it is to just go to a job, sit in an office, or actually, frankly, even going out and digging ditches, which I've done as well back in the day. So they talk about that, the fact that so much labor that our mothers do, our mothers, our daughters, our aunts, our partners, especially when it's with a relationship with a man and a woman. Men benefit so much from that, and frankly, sometimes take advantage of the fact that women do so much and we don't give them enough credit because we have these gendered assumptions that women prefer to stay in the home and do this kind of stuff, or they want to stay and raise kids. We are not born any particular way that says we're men are not born in any particular way that makes us more or less qualified to take care of children or make food or clean a home than women, right? All of that stuff is made up. In other words, gender, not sex, right? Sex refers to body parts. Gender in and of itself is a social construct. In other words, it is created by humans. It is made up. It is pretend. It changes over time. The way that we look at how men and women behave now is quite different from the way we understand how men and women behaved 100 years ago. And it's going to continue to change and to shift, especially as society as a whole begins to understand that not everyone falls within these two categories, right? You're either a man or a woman. No, there's a bunch of people who exist right in the middle or don't even exist in the spectrum at all. And that's particularly okay, right? It's okay. As long as you're not hurting anybody, you do what you want, you be who you are. I think that's a part of it as well. So, I think Oakley touched on the fact that a lot of women were really, really unhappy. A lot of women she interviewed were unhappy with this gender distribution of labor, with the fact that they had to stay home and they wanted to get rid of the system. Um, so I think the book chapter says, today the domestic division of labor is contested in most households, and there's a slow movement towards gender equality. Sure, In some spaces, there definitely is a slow movement towards gender equality. Not everywhere, not in every country, not in every part of the world, not in every family. And caregiving tasks mainly still remain largely gendered, right? By gendered, it means that taking care of children mostly falls into the parameters, or women are mostly in charge of taking care of children. So I also started to think about the context of the different waves of feminism. Our first wave feminism, which was like in the really early 1800s, where basically it was like feminism strictly for white upper middle class women that wanted equality. Then we had second wave feminism that was sort of like along the lines of like the U.S. civil rights movement, rights movements around the world, asking for gender equality. But even that was almost focused specifically on white middle class, the upper middle class women wanting equal rights. It didn't necessarily include the rights of women of color, of immigrants, of trans individuals. And now we sort of have, we could argue, a third or fourth wave feminism where it's more inclusive. We're talking about the rights of transgender people, the rights of women who live in developing countries, the rights of working class women or poor women, the rights of indigenous women. So that's really, really important as well. We have this really odd phenomenon, right? We think of Toronto as this the global city that's full where everything is all good. We have equality, but we also have this dynamic of like foreign childcare workers coming into work here, like a lot of women from the Philippines who leave their kids back home, usually with family, and come here to raise mostly upper middle class or upper class children who don't look like them, who are mostly white. And so, you know, what happens in that context where we have equality for a man and a woman for the most part, or for just a white family, but we do not have equality for this person who's being exploited because it's domestic care labor. It doesn't necessarily get paid minimum wage. She gets paid something, but oftentimes rent is deducted from that, food. So one of my students did a pretty amazing TED talk on Filipino nannies, and it was quite informative and quite wonderful. So something to keep in mind, right? What does equality for one person mean versus oppression for another person, right? Is it really equality or freedom if all of us are not free? The answer is no, right? No one is free while others is oppressed. There's one of the quotes from one of my favorite bands growing up called Anti-Flag. They're a punk band from Pittsburgh, so check them out if you like punk music. And I think the book also touches on a really big issue, which is most of the gender violence or most of the violence that's geared towards women. And again, gender doesn't always just isn't code for women. When we say gender, that doesn't mean women. When we say gendered, oftentimes it's used to refer to women, but gendered violence exists in different ways, right? For example, if we think about violence perpetrated by the police, women tend to be sexually assaulted while men tend to be physically assaulted. That is gendered violence. For example, if you think about the phenomenon of missing and murdered Indigenous women, I believe it's women are actually more likely to be found dead, while men are more likely to disappear completely. So that is also a gendered phenomenon. In other words, a phenomenon, an action, or an activity that focuses specifically in some particular way to one gender versus another, or a gender, or it could also be gendered in a way where it falls between the middle, where people perhaps don't fit into either gendered category. Um, but yeah, this issue of domestic violence is a big one. I see it happening with people, with women who are college age, experiencing physical, sexual, psychological abuse. And so the book states that the abuse towards women is more likely to happen by a husband or lover or romantic partner. So that's something to keep in mind. And I think we've had lots of discussions. Like a couple years ago, there was this debate over this video called Baby, It's Cold Outside. I know it's a pretty popular song up here. And we actually screened the video in one of my classes, and my students saw how particularly problematic it was. So there was a big debate here about whether they should leave the song or not. But the point is, consent is important. And if you don't have a loud, enthusiastic yes from a partner, then you don't have consent. And also keep in mind that you can't consent if a person cannot consent if they're intoxicated. So drunk, high, whatever. So something to keep in mind. So yeah, most of the violence that women experience usually comes from a romantic partner. Most of the sexual assaults that happen to women usually come from someone who you know, a friend, a partner, etc., a boss. It's not just randoms on the street who are attacking women. It's people who you know. So keep that in. And also important to keep in mind that I think it's really important as a father of three little boys. We need to begin to shift the culture to start teaching little boys and young men and grown men that it's not okay to touch, kiss, hug, or sexually assault women. Women are not here for our enjoyment. They're not commodities, they're not products for us to be used. And again, it's unfortunate that I have to talk about this because we have this, right, North America and across the world, we have this growing incel issue, right? Involuntary celibates, people who tend to be, really isolated men from the dominant group, so white men, who are sort of really upset because women don't want to be with them, right? So something to keep in mind. That's why we need to start teaching little boys about consent from a really, really early age, which is what I do now, just with my little boys, like telling them you need to ask someone if you want to give them a hug or a kiss or a high five. And also, nobody has to touch. You don't have to give anyone a kiss or a hug or a high five, or no one has to touch you if you don't want to. It's also important to teach little boys this, who, little boys are also sometimes the victim of sexual assault. I think 1 in 10 little boys, or 1 in 10 men have been sexually assaulted, mostly by other men, and 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted, also almost entirely by men. So that is a gender phenomenon. It's something that we need to address. Um, I think just to sum it up, we have this issue of heteronormativity. We live in a heteronormative society. What does that mean? It means that our society is still geared towards seeing a man and a woman being together as normal. And oftentimes people who don't fit into that category, so someone who's trans, two men who are dating each other, two women who are dating each other out in public could still face violence, threats, assaults, not just by random people on the street, but also by law enforcement agencies. And it's something to keep in mind. It's really, really important. It's important to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Whether you agree with their way of life or not is completely irrelevant. We need to respect everyone and treat them the way that we want to be treated. So yeah, that more or less sums it up. Again, I'll be there during office hours, and I'll be there during the BB the collaborate sessions. Again, I'd much rather have a conversation with you than read some 5 paragraph email. Because to be honest, I'm gonna stop reading at line number 3 and tell you to come to office hours. So please come keep me company. I want to get to know y'all better. Honestly, my favorite part of being an instructor, being a professor, is getting to know students. So this is really, really challenging because my favorite part of getting to see your faces in the classroom and getting to chat you up is completely gone. So come chat me up during office hours. I'd be good to see you. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing y'all on Tuesday.